really at policy level what governments are doing in English and what's happening and what the implications of that are for teachers. So the theme of the conference is reflections, so I will reflect on English in ASEAN. I will look at the role of English and the motivations that people may or may not have to learn English. And look a little bit at directions, talk a little bit about some of the ways that governments are enhancing English in the education system, and also move forward and talk about teacher perspective and the implications of this for teachers in the region. First of all, let's just look a little bit at English in ASEAN. Many ways to measure English proficiency. We can look at school results, we can count transactions, business transactions in English, we can look at university, we can look at all sorts of ways. But properly speaking, some of the broad groupings, this is a bit of a league table of where different countries are in terms of their, let's say, their level of English generally in the population. It's a very rough grouping. And you may want to speculate on Singapore, where English is the only country in the region where English is actually a national language. But the Philippines too, where the American influence has left a very deep imprint of English across the community. And if we look down, we see that countries like Myanmar, Malaysia, also ex-colonies, don't do so well. So clearly that's not a very common link. More obvious, there's a link, I think, between economic development and the role of English. And one might speculate, does English make people wealthy? Some studies do seem to show that people with better English tend to be wealthier. However, if you dig a bit down deeper, you find that that is not a causal relationship. The reason for that is that people with better education are generally wealthier, and people with a better education generally have better English as a result of the education. So English per se does not make people wealthier, good education does. We see here the groupings. Malaysia, second, Brunei with Malaysia. We look at Thailand and look at economic there. Thailand is quite a wealthy country in the region, so they do very successfully economically, and yet its English levels are not so high. And then down there, lots of Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos. So a complex, in my experience, apart from a few countries, this is largely a cosmetic thing. You see this in Thailand quite a lot. There's been a lot of talk about the need to improve English in Thailand, and yet really all we see are some school competitions. Cambodia. There are some large-scale reforms going on in the region. The standout country is Malaysia, with its national blueprint for education, a very ambitious program of reform across the education system. We see also in Vietnam, with its 2020 foreign languages strategy, a strong drive to enhance the teaching of English in the school curriculum. And we do see in Myanmar, where the Comprehensive Education Sector Review is about to report on the education system across the country, and hopefully lead to a blueprint for large-scale reform over a long period of time. And English will be a part of that. We have to ask ourselves, oh yeah, everybody needs English. You're going to have English to do well in ASEAN. Is that true? Is that really true? Unless you work for ASEAN, unless you work for a multinational or a multi-regional company, will we really need English? How real is that need? What will be the purpose of English? Why would we perceive that we need English? Well, there'll need to be an advantage. The individual will need to perceive an advantage in having English, because that will be the motivational factor that leads them to demand change and to develop, to improve their own English if they're self-directing their learning. Let's have a quick look at some of the factors that may lead to need. Obviously, trade and employment. We believe there will be more trade between countries, although let's be honest, there's also already an awful lot of trade in the inter-ASEAN scenario. A lot of talk about people being able to move and go and work in other countries. I think if we unpick that one a little bit, you might find that it may be a little bit overstated. The reality is that if you are a dentist, if you are a Singaporean dentist, realistically, even if you can come to work in Thailand, you have to speak Thai. It's all very well to say you need to speak English, but you're also going to have to speak Thai because you're going to be dealing with Thai people. Likewise, if you're even a migrant worker, an unskilled worker, if you're going through Myanmarese and you come to Thailand, you need probably to speak Thai. What we will see is that increasingly multinational companies and multi-ASEAN companies will use English, and therefore people who work in those professions or those types of companies are likely to feel the need for better English and to want to improve. And I think the notion that there will be mass movement of labour between countries is a little bit overstated, certainly in terms of English language proficiency requirements. Which languages, cover that, which skills? Because I think English, yes, if you are going to work or move within ASEAN, clearly language skills will be important. Other skills too, 21st century skills, that much maligned term, so the ability to think critically. We do have very complex environments, so it's not that easy to go and work in another ASEAN country, not yet. That will change. We look at the EU, another integrated common market. It took quite a long time for countries to regulate the labour market to really allow free flow of labour between countries. We are a long way from that already. Look at education, another drive for English. I mentioned already the need for skilled workers, not just English, 21st century skills, if you can call it that. I don't like the term myself. Deep learning, better term perhaps. There's already seen good moves to standardise educational systems, so changing, for example, the academic calendar, changing the number of years for different sectors or sections of basic and higher education, in order to allow students, particularly at higher, to move from one country to another to study in different countries. So we make a parallel between a year in Thailand is worth a year in Vietnam, is worth a year in Singapore. That means you could do a multi-part degree. English has increased in schools already, even before ASEAN. There is more English in schools and at younger ages, as I will talk about in a minute. ASEAN universities, not many, in fact none I think, currently count very highly in international rankings of world-class universities. And most universities would aspire to that. I think Singapore is the exception in everything. It's a very different kind of environment. To become higher in rankings, some of the features that are measured are, for example, the number of international students in the university. And if you have international students, if you want to attract international students, you will need to offer English medium programs and courses. So this will drive, hopefully, the need for English in higher education. Similarly, the number of research links that a university can demonstrate will contribute quite strongly to their ranking in the world tables. Therefore, more and more research links, this means more and more collaboration between countries likely to be in English. So these are two factors driving English education. Transnational education, if you know what that is. Transnational education, broadly speaking, is where a third party comes into a market to offer programs in that market. So the standard model, for example, in Malaysia, very common. Malaysian students may go to the UK, they may go to Australia, they may go to Singapore. That's not transnational education. But if the University of Nottingham comes into Malaysia and sets up a campus, that is a transnational education scenario. And that again is driving English medium instruction in those countries. So when a foreign university or institution comes in, they're likely to offer their programs in English. And we expect to see much more T&E exchanges and developments across the region, not just from the traditional Western countries, if you like, the UK, the US, but also from Singaporean and Malaysian institutions themselves setting up in country. And of course China is there too always. Finally, just to look at some of the other areas that drive the need for English, the BPO sector, the business process outsourcing, that means. So if we think of call centres, the drive for cheap labour, let's call it value for money labour, by the world, has, for example, led to the huge development of the sector in the Philippines. So we see many European and North American institutions having their call centre function based in the Philippines. And of course, the economic advantage to the Philippines, therefore, is huge. And that is driven, the rationale there is that the high levels of English in the Philippines allow the BPO sector to develop. Other countries in the region that have been slated as potential markets for BPO sector are Vietnam, although I think levels of English are somewhat behind still there. Singapore is a bit too small, the population, but Malaysia too has been mooted as a potential country for BPO advancement. Tourism, of course, a huge driver, a huge personal driver for people in ASEAN, within ASEAN, in between ASEAN and elsewhere, as economic development comes, and likely to require English for bringing tourism. If you want to be a tourist, you probably need to speak some English in order to get around. The internet has led to a huge increase in the ability of people to exchange media, cultural exchange, so movies, TV, music, and that in turn has driven interest in English language, because much of the world's content media is in English, and there's a great interest in the need for English in ASEAN, but undeniably the individual across the world indeed will always express a very strong desire to have English in order to access those opportunities, those cultural opportunities, those communication opportunities that are available. But as English becomes an ASEAN language, so English for ASEAN, we talk about Singlish, we talk about Tinglish, we talk about English, and we talk about ASEAN-English. What kind of English might it be? It's been adopted as a common language and the only common language of the region. It's likely to evolve and is already evolving in line with other world trends. So the English of ASEAN is and will be international English. The notion of native speaker supremacy is already dead long ago. It's not true. English does not belong to native speakers, it belongs to everyone. And in English it will belong to everybody, in ASEAN it will belong to everybody. So the type of English will not necessarily be British American English, it will be an English that is common or unique or shared by the region, so not native speaker. It will focus strongly on strong communication skills. So speaking and listening skills will be more important than writing, reading skills, and of course grammatical or vocabulary accuracy. Because people will be talking, they will be working, they will be travelling, they will be studying, and communication will be more important. It will be authentic English. It will not be the English of boring textbooks or grammar exercises, because it will be transactional English. People will be using their English to do things, to talk to people, to ask for things, to go places. And so it will be real life English, not static English of a course book. And finally, I think it's quite important to realise that proficiency in English will likely change. And if you're familiar with CEFR, B1 English, intermediate, upper intermediate, already is probably enough. You see the pattern of learners of English, private learners of English, stop studying, usually around B1, sometimes B2 levels, as if they're paying for themselves. Because when they get to that level, they realise that they actually have enough English to do what they mostly need to do. I think this has big implications for the targets we set in our schools and the targets we as English teachers expect of our learners in terms of their achievement. Okay. So let's move on now and talk about how to improve levels of English, or the ways that governments have tried to enhance English in the curriculum. First of all, some challenges across the region. In all countries, I think, again, except for Singapore. Singapore is an exception. We have lots of problems with the abilities, if you like, or the competencies of English teachers in the classrooms. Many of them don't have the proficiency levels that are required really to be a good teacher. We see lots of examples where pupils have better English than their teacher, and that's obviously quite a difficult relationship because there are many hierarchical issues going on in classrooms. Teachers are not trained in communicative methodology, so if we're to teach communication skills, if we are to teach real-life English, we will have to change the way we teach, as we will see shortly. And they are often not trained well. In many countries, teachers go straight into school or into school after a very short training, come with just a bit of primary English, may not even finish secondary education. So training is an issue across the region. As I said already, the English that we are teaching in most countries is not really communicative English. I'm not going to go into a definition of communicative English, but we see a lot of rote learning, we see very, very stale textbooks with very boring pieces, very high-level pieces at the wrong level for the student, not interesting, not motivating, not communicative. We don't have speaking practice built in to many of the state textbooks that we have across the region. non-communicative English. We mentioned already, I said, the need for 21st century skills. As English teachers, we are probably becoming more and more aware that we're quite fortunate in the profession, because actually good English teaching, by default, uses or exemplifies the need for 21st century skills. So really good language teaching will do a lot of group work. It will be very learner-centered. It will foster collaboration between people. It will lead to critical thinking, because creating purpose in communication is about doing tasks, it's about doing things. So we're quite fortunate that we do have 21st century skills as English teachers, but across the curriculum these are poorly developed, and we still have a culture of rote learning throughout the region. If we don't change the tests, if we don't change the course books, we are unlikely to be able to develop communicative English. And we know that the backwash effect of changing an assessment system can have an incredibly positive kickback on levels of English. So if we don't test speaking, then we won't teach speaking, because we all focus on exam results, parents, learners, teachers. We are measured and we are judged on exam results. If we don't test speaking, then there is very little motivation to teach it in the classroom. So we need to reform that. Textbooks, I mentioned already, lots of examples of very old-fashioned textbooks, quite boring, quite dry, wrong level, not very motivating, not very well written. IT skills connectivity is an issue across the region. Lots of countries still struggle with connectivity. It may be okay in the urban areas, but it's often much weaker and much poorer out in the provinces or in rural areas. And therefore the potential of IT as a learning tool, as a resource and for materials is often not realised. And finally, all of this, what we see across the region, from Cambodia to Thailand to Vietnam to Indonesia to Brunei to Malaysia, except for Singapore, very low achievement at exit. This is from school, mostly. Because of that low achievement, we see poor confidence across our learners. People express fear of communicating, the fear of talking, because they are leaving school on low levels of English. So what can we do about it? Well, there are a number of ways that governments can and do address issues. One is to have more English on the curriculum. Teaching English from primary, at the moment now, only Laos and Indonesia don't teach English at primary level. They start at grade 7. Cambodia and Indonesia, and Laos, and until recently Vietnam used to start at grade 6, but Vietnam is now pushing down to grade 1. Otherwise, all countries now teach English from grade 1, some form of English. The number of hours varies quite dramatically. That might seem like a good thing. Everybody says, oh, it's good to learn a language when you're young. The young can absorb English much better, they can be fluent, they can be bilingual. It's not actually really necessarily true. There isn't really much evidence to say that teaching kids English from age 6 is particularly any better than teaching them English from age 11. What matters, of course, is the quality of the teaching, the type of teaching, the motivation of the learner, and the importance that is placed upon English. So it may seem like a good fix to teach English younger, but however, it doesn't really work unless you back it up with better teaching. Similarly, the number of lessons, we see a huge range, the number of hours devoted to English in the curriculum. And this is schools, of course, I'm focused mainly on schools. In Cambodia, it's about 700 hours, because they don't teach in primary. Thailand, it's about 1,500 hours. This is grade 1 to 12, or grade 1 to 13, depends on how you measure. Malaysia, about 1,600 hours across the curriculum, and Singapore, 2,500 hours. But again, Singapore exceptional. English is a national language and has a different place in the school system. If we think about CEFR, if we think about the number of hours that we would, as language teachers, expect learners to require to move through the CEFR levels, obviously estimates vary, but let's say in an Asian context it's around, 500 hours to move a level, or 300 hours. If we're trying to go from A0, which is most of our learners, to say B2 or C1, well, if you do the maths, you can see that there are not enough hours in the curriculum. Would I recommend that governments put more hours into English? Not necessarily, because to do that means you have to push something else out of the curriculum. If you put extra hours for English, it means fewer hours for another subject. It means more teachers in order to deliver those lessons. It means more course books in order to cover those hours. So it's not such a simple thing. You can't just add hours into the curriculum. What you can do, and Vietnam is now talking very seriously about this, a really quick fix is just take an hour, 1 hour from the curriculum, maybe an extra hour or one of the existing hours, and just dedicate it to teaching speaking. This is quite a good idea, really. So instead of get away from the coursework, let's have 1 hour a week or 1.5 hours a week on speaking. And we can add that into the curriculum. We might see the difference to communicative competency. In higher education, there is a drive to teach more and more courses in English medium. Sorry. The third one there, this is about bilingual. The idea of teaching other subjects through English, often the secondary, mostly maths and science. It's been experimented with across the region. Malaysia most famously, or notoriously, went all the way down the line of adopting an international curriculum, only to pull it 3 or 4 years later because of political pressure perhaps, or parental pressure. Thailand has a smallish bilingual program. Most countries these days, thankfully I would say, are moving away from this. It doesn't really work. It only works if your teacher is fully bilingual. It only really works if the teacher is able to translate freely between languages. And if you don't do it properly, it can actually be very negative. It can lead to neither attainment in English nor attainment in the target subject. So studies have shown that pupils talk poorly in a bilingual context don't do as well at the maths and science or the English, therefore is negative. Okay, sorry, into higher, same move, put more and more English medium courses into higher. Quite a good idea. Again, if the pupils, the students are coming in, the undergraduates are coming in with levels below those required, it may not work. And another one is to require compulsory achievement at English in order to enter university or to exit or to graduate or matriculate at the end of university. Also, probably not a great idea. It disadvantages poorer or disadvantaged pupils. People who have not had a better basic education are therefore at a disadvantage in that context. So those are the types of things that governments have done and are doing. And although I've been a bit critical, I do commend governments that at least have tried and are trying to address the structural problems, if you like. Move now to the teacher, to methodology. So I mentioned already we can introduce communicative methodology. Lots of training programs, including, frankly, some of the British Council's training programs, bring teachers together, give them 40, 20, 60 hours of training in methodology, in using communicative methodology or learner-centered methodology, and then send them back to the classroom, expecting them to adopt those methods. Well, it often doesn't work either. But if you don't change what's going on in the classroom, then it's quite hard to change a methodology. It's all a sort of chicken and egg type scenario. But we can look at learner-centered methodologies. We can at least try to instill in teachers an understanding of how good language teaching works, and hope that perhaps some of what we deliver, some of what we train in will hit in the classroom. Methodology, I mentioned sort of 21st century skills, learner-centered, deep learning, and the advantage that English teachers have already. Well, I think if we could see methodology changing across the whole curriculum, it's likely to have a very positive impact on English as well. We will see. I mentioned assessment, the backwash effect. If you teach speaking and you test speaking, then people are driven and motivated to do well at speaking. We can change the textbooks. Many countries are doing that or have done that. And we can use ICT. We can take advantage of digital resources and digital platforms in order to bring our classrooms to life, to energize and to make motivating lessons. ICT in itself is not going to do anything for anybody's English. It is a platform. It is not a methodology. It is not a tool per se. It is something that teachers need to use. So teachers need ICT skills in order to make effective use of ICT in the classroom. Okay, let's move now to the classroom, to actual teachers. We are many of us teachers in one form or another. we have to change the way we teach English and to improve levels of English across the region, we will need to change the way teachers teach. So communicative, authentic, real life, realistic, skills-based teaching. Away from rote learning, not knowledge of language, but the ability to use language. Who cares if you get the grammar right, as long as somebody understands you? We don't want to be displaying language. It's not showing you how many points I can get on my spelling test, or my vocabulary test, or my grammar test, but let me show you how I can practice, how I can use English, and let me teach you as a teacher how to use English. I mentioned already, good enough English at B1 or B2 level, authentic English, ASEAN English. We want to focus less on accuracy and more on fluency. And in an Asian context, that's quite important because increasingly, well, traditionally, exam results have been focused on points and the number of points and ranking people in systems. Very much focused on accuracy, getting things right, as opposed to achieving something through the fluency of communication. Teachers become facilitators, 21st century skills, group work, pair work, task-based learning. The teacher facilitates. The teacher is not necessarily the font of all knowledge, but is giving knowledge to learners. And finally, our learners themselves need to become active participants in their own learning. They need to engage, they need to use English, they need to do things with English, not just sit there and memorize English. Teachers, we can teach teachers English, and that's a good thing. In Malaysia, the ProAl project in Malaysia is a language proficiency project for teachers. It's not focused on methodology, it's focused on increasing language levels of teachers so that they are more confident and competent in the English classroom. We can try to train for a pre-service or in-service, and also recruit with the ability to teach in a communicative way, so we can set criteria and we can measure those criteria and reward people or employ people who have the skills. We need to help teachers to become facilitators. It's not easy. We have a lot of restrictions in the curriculum, a lot of restrictions from the assessment system, but we need to enable teachers to be more able to communicate and do communicative teaching. The teachers should be able to manage the learning process, so they should be able to assess their learners, work out their needs, manage the process. Is language being developed? Is it being used? Is it communicative? We're not managing whether they get results at the end, we're managing the process of learning. The teachers need to be able to think about to teach into competencies. So it's not I got 100 points in my English test, it's I am able to write an email in English at this level. I am able to understand the conversation between two speakers from I am able to talk about myself and my interests, etc. These are competency-based, outcome-driven scenarios, not the number of points I get on this phone test. And teachers themselves, I said already, they need ICT skills. If teachers are not confident or competent in ICT, they will not be able to take advantage of the opportunities that good ICT resources offer. Okay. Ultimately, just to summarise, we want teachers who are able to manage positive language learning environments, so encouraging, motivating, stimulating. They can generate those positive attitudes to learners, the fear, the shyness that we see in many Asian learners across the region. We need to be able to generate positive attitudes. Teachers who can develop sought-after skills. I said it already, 21st century skills. English teachers are particularly well positioned to develop those skills, and in ASEAN, those skills will become valuable. They should be able to bring in, just to the ASEAN thing, the global classroom, global learners, global citizens. It's good if our teachers are able to look at intercultural connections in the classroom. And those teachers, because we have a huge problem, if we have to change the teachers, we have to be able to develop teachers on the job. So a good English teacher will be able to also nurture and mentor their colleagues and other teachers. So an on-the-job approach. Never finished. Okay, that's the end. So, I was going to ask some questions. I think I don't have any time for questions. I put some questions that you might want to think about. The role of English in the country where where you are, the reasons why people want to learn English, and then some of the policy implications. What does that mean for language policy or for language education policy? What does it mean for what's happening now, what could happen? How are we going to achieve that change? As teachers, as educators, we really should be trying to lobby for change if we can, in the context that we will, as far as possible. That could be just as much as educating our learners, educating our parents, but also if we can, if we're in positions of authority, talking to those people who have more authority and power about doing it. Okay, I think my time's up. I have to stop, so I'm going to go out of time for questions. Anybody have any questions? 5 minutes. Okay, for 5 minutes. Anybody have any questions for me? Okay, well, stand up and shout, I think. It depends. The truth is that it doesn't work very well unless the teacher is fully competent. What we've seen in most of the countries where it's been tried is trying to get teachers to teach in English who don't really have English skills. So what you end up with is translation. It's all teaching through translation, which is not the same thing at all. So if you can find a context where it works, like Spain, there's some really good examples in Spain, really bilingual teaching, it can be great. It's a great concept. Great idea, but it's not really, it doesn't really work in most of the ASEAN countries where we are. Well, yeah, language integrated. Well, because it's a great thing when it works. It is fantastic teaching subject through English. It's probably more of a higher education context or possibly a European context, yes. Okay. More questions? Is there one more question? Okay, I'm going to stop now. Maybe develop as teachers and as educators. And finally, just a plug for the British Council. We have a stand upstairs. It's a bit out of the way, but if you go there, you can find some free resources, free things, information about our work. Please do visit our stand. We are upstairs. Thank you very much, everybody.